remember going to my doctor to have a follow-up meeting and bringing him a stack of studies and some information I'd printed off about microdosing. And I was like, please, I don't want to go on SSRIs. I've spent a lot of my life being a very anxious individual, someone who's always striving for perfection, always wanting to succeed, even if it means I'm going to run myself into the ground. I was the eldest child in my family and had a lot of pressure and things put on me. And I was raised religious. I was raised Mennonite, so I wasn't allowed to do a lot of the things I wanted to do when I was young, and in turn that made me very rebellious when I was a teenager. And I ended up, as many teenagers do, dealing with depression and anxiety and angst, but in a really, serious way. And as I got older, I learned ways to deal with that. I developed a really solid relationship with my plant ally, cannabis. Initially helped me through a lot of that anxiety. I remember being a college student and everyone around me was drinking. I would have a beer here and there, but I was not into this idea of waking up every morning feeling like crap. And weed really helped me deal with the anxiety of being in my early 20s, living in a city that was very expensive and frustrating. I live in Vancouver. Cannabis was really sort of opening the door, I guess, if you will, to psychedelics for me. Before any of these meaningful psychedelic experiences, I was definitely very tightly wound and perhaps aggressive at times. A lot of repressed anger that I didn't really deal with until later in life. I wouldn't classify this as a meaningful... I mean, yes, it was meaningful, but it wasn't like I was like, okay, I'm going to consume the psychedelic and have this deep solo experience and deal with my trauma. It was me and 5 or 6 other friends, and we all decided, let's have some mushrooms and walk down to the beach and listen to our favorite albums and make pastel art. I still think of this when people ask me about meaningful psychedelic experiences, not because I dealt with anything particularly traumatizing, but because I can still remember the way I bonded with my friends and the way we walked down to the beach and the ocean came alive before my eyes. It was just so cool and so vivid and really wonderful. I had no fear that I was going to have an awful time because I was with people I liked and in a safe place. And so when I started using psychedelics in a more meaningful way, in my later 20s, around 27, I was diagnosed with PTSD, depression and anxiety, all of this stuff I'd been dealing with as a teenager. And then in my early 20s, I dealt with some sexual trauma and some other things, and it just really all sort of came to a head. My doctor wanted me to go on SSRIs, and this is around the time that I had been learning a little bit more about mushrooms and other psychedelics in a more serious way. I had experiences with them, but I remember going to my doctor to have a follow-up meeting and bringing him a stack of studies and some information I'd printed off about microdosing. And I was like, please, I don't want to go on SSRIs. My mother had used them and had a horrible time on them, and so I was like, let's see if I can avoid this. So to my incredible surprise, even to this day, he was like, I've been reading some of these studies. Okay, come back to me in a couple of weeks and tell me what's happening. I still remember the first time I took a microdose. It was in this living room. And it was the first time I was able to sort of, not silence, but turn down the volume on the inner critic that was just constantly telling me, you're a piece of shit. You shouldn't be here. Just end your life. And I was like, whoa. It was very profound. And so that really helped me sort of get out of this incredibly depressive state. And then later on in life, I used other plant medicines, psilocybin in bigger doses, ayahuasca, San Pedro, to mindfully and intentionally move through some of these traumatizing things I dealt with in life and figure out what it was I wanted to create and do in this world, in this lifetime. But really the most profound experience I've ever had was the most recent one. That was in April, so a couple of months, 6 or 7 months ago now, and that was with Iboga. And so this was an experience that really can't rank them. They've all been very profound and have had their own specific meaning. I understand why they call it the Mount Everest of psychedelics. I had never had an experience with Iboga prior to this one, and most people generally when they do Iboga, they don't want to do it again. I'll preface it with that. One thing was to connect with my lineage, to learn more about my family, to understand that really deep-seated trauma that we don't even know is there sometimes. And 2, was to sort of seek insight into how to get out of my own way. Those I would say were my two biggest things that I was sort of searching for. Is an experience I had with Iboga in April 2022. It had an incredible impact on my life in many ways and for many reasons. One, I had this experience 3 days before my 32nd birthday. Heading into, a new year for myself, seeking new goals, checking off other things that I'd been working on, looking for new projects, and also feeling really just stuck and dissatisfied with my work and wondering constantly, am I writing about the right things? Am I talking to the right people? And just really seeking something bigger than this narrative about businesses and companies on the stock market. Very done with all of that. And also dealing with some things personally, things with my family, wanting to learn more about why certain people in my family are the way they are, why I inherited those qualities, how I can work with them in a better way, things like that. And so in writing my book, I learned that in Africa, the Bwiti use Iboga to do two things. They use it to diagnose illness and to connect with their ancestors. I looked at this second piece, this connecting with their ancestors piece, very closely when I was about to use the substance and had many intentions because it's a 12-hour experience. But one of them was to connect with my grandparents who had passed on, with my cousin who I unfortunately lost to an overdose a couple of years ago, have an opportunity to really see where they're at and put some of that grief that I had to, not to rest, but just know that they're good. And I was able to do that, which is incredible. I would say that for myself, it involved a lot of sort of dialogue and asking the medicine for things, and then go back in time and witness moments in my father's life, moments that crushed him, that led to how he exhibits and carries himself today. Same thing with my mother, with my grandparents, to actually see and be there while they're going through these things, some things that I didn't even know happened until I confirmed after I had this experience with members of my family. And that familial aspect was incredibly helpful for me because I was able to recognize how things that I'd inherited from my family worked against what I want to bring into this world. And I love my family. I bring this information to them. After I came back, I was had all these things written out, and I think I wrote 40 pages in my journal during this experience. Letters to my mother, letters to my father, letters to my partner, 7 or 8 different poems. It was just flowing out of me. Through that experience, I was also able to reconnect with that creative force that I felt had been kind of stifled by honestly writing about things that I was okay, whatever, but things that I didn't necessarily feel called to write about or excited to write about. And that's not to say a journalist has to write things they love all the time. That's impossible. That's very hard. I strive to do that now, and I've been writing a lot less as a result. What this experience was able to do for me was really clarify what it is I want to work on and what I don't want to work on, and it gave me the strength to say no when I feel even just the tiniest inkling of no. I'm typically a people pleaser. I want to say yes and write about all these things, but it's hard. So yeah, now I've been saying no more. So thank you, Iboga, for giving me that that ability. I've also been saying yes to the really fuck yes moments in life. I've been seeing those a lot more clearly. So the clarity, I would say, that has come from that experience is the biggest takeaway. And I haven't worked with any medicine in a serious way since that because it just was so very meaningful. I would say it has a lot to do with that piece on clarity, on really being able to listen to my intuition, to listen to that little voice that sometimes we push down because society is you should be hustling or whatever, insert thing here. That's been really crucial for me because it's hard. There's a lot of things that are pushing us from day to day to make certain decisions, people and career things and political things, and it can be really hard to tune into that. And I think being able to, in this Iboga experience, connect with my ancestors in a meaningful way, that was one piece of it, but to also see myself and see the impact that I have through my work in a serious way. That's hard for me to say, actually. I'm just going to say that because I feel like, oh, I don't have any impact. I'm small. I don't do anything. You know, that's another thing that Iboga helped me move through. This idea that I'm just a nobody and I don't have any impact and my work doesn't mean anything. I know that working with other medicines to move through some more traumatic things in my life first really helped me get a lot out of this Iboga experience. I'm sure that if I hadn't done a lot of that previous work, this Iboga experience would have been completely different. And I think that's really the beauty of plant medicine and psychedelics, is that they give us exactly what we need. In the weeks prior, I worked with a coach, so I spoke with her, I think on 2 or 3 occasions, just about intention, you know, why I was deciding to do Ibogaine, what sort of things I wanted to address, a couple of things about my story and so forth. We spoke once while I was away, and then I think 2 or 3 times after I returned. So that preparation piece is very critical. The integration piece is very critical. Talking with someone who had had an Ibogaine experience, who had been through a lot of the similar things I had been through, who wasn't just going to hear me and say, okay, like someone who was going to coach me really to do something with the insights that I received. That was really helpful, because something that happens when you come home from a psychedelic experience, especially when you know, if you've traveled to the jungle or wherever, you come home and nobody else has had that experience. And so you feel kind of alone, and maybe, you know, folks in your life can't relate to you in the way you thought they could, and maybe they're not as excited about the experience as you were, just because they don't get it. It's not because they just haven't had it. Being able to talk to someone who knows is really important. That was a really critical part of my integration. Journaling, having moments of silence every day, moving my body, listening to the music that I listened to while I was in this Ibogaine experience. I still have the playlist saved. All of these things have been really important, and things that I engage in at least once a day to sort of remember. Even if I go back and read some of the things I've written during that experience, it reminds me, like, oh, okay, we're still on this journey. This isn't just a thing that happened a couple of months ago. You're still living this. That's been really helpful to me. Someone once described the Ibogaine integration process to me as, in the days after, or in the hours after, you're going to feel like, what? I don't remember what happened. That was insane. And then she described it like picking up a snow globe, and then when the snow is sort of settling, that's like these insights coming in the days after, like, oh, this is why I do this. This is why that happened. This is why. And so I really experienced that in a huge way. And that was really, really, really unique. I mean, one thing about Ibogaine is 90 days after you take the medicine, you have this metabolite of the drug, noribogaine, in your body. And so you've literally, like, you have it with you. And I very much felt that. It was almost like I could hear it talking to me sometimes. Like when I came home, I would open the fridge and it was like a voice was like, eat that, don't eat that, eat this, eat. Like it was really interesting how this medicine sort of stuck with me. Profoundly positive, but there's a caveat there. But that's because I've done a lot of work to integrate them, these experiences with them. I know that psychedelics get a lot of credit and hype for change that they're able to sort of create in people's lives, but I hesitate to give them all the credit, simply because I do believe they really open us up to the possibility of change. And whether we walk into that change and decide to sort of really, you know, we're talking about integration. What is that? It's taking what you've learned and putting life into it and living the lessons that you've been taught in your psychedelic experiences every single day, not just when you're in ceremony, not just when you're meditating. It's absolutely vital to have some sort of community, even if it's just 1 or 2 people in your life that you feel safe talking to about your psychedelic experiences, who aren't going to gaslight you about them, who are just going to listen from the heart. If you can find a community, because it's hard to do this alone. In fact, I would say it's impossible to do this alone. Having a support system in place before you have a psychedelic experience, I would say, is definitely something that I've been lucky to have, and I wish for everyone. You know the feeling you get when you have a psychedelic experience, particularly with like psilocybin or one of the classics, that we're all one and we're all in this together. You know, I think that comes to mind for me.